Are you tired of lugging around your laptop and Nintendo Switch? Well, have no fear, because the AYA NEO 2 is here. This little monster packs the Ryzen 7 6800U, a CPU we know all too well, but it's powerful enough to make your Nintendo Switch look like a toy. Just kidding, it's pretty powerful though. So let's take a look at a few specs to see how it compares to the Steam Deck. Now let's discuss some pros, including the design and other features. The AYA NEO 2 has a sleek and portable design, which looks way better in person, because honestly it looks kinda like a Fisher-Price handheld, at least in pictures. The glass top feels very premium in contrast to the mostly plastic body, which, if you recall, the Steam Deck is almost entirely made up of as well. For controls, the buttons are all quite clicky. There are 2 customizable buttons near the shoulder buttons, which are a nice alternative to not having back buttons like the deck has. And no worries here about the D-pad, it's quite good too. For the thumbsticks, they have those fancy Hall effect sensors that you keep hearing about, which have slightly larger tops as well, in comparison to the deck, so it gives some added comfort. And if you like RGB, there's RGB lighting around the base of the thumbsticks, which is a much better implementation than on the AOKZOE A1. Or of course, the deck with no RGB, which makes it totally unusable. 0 of 10, Valve, you have failed miserably. What's more, the RGB can be completely customized in AYA Space as well, meaning you can have this unicorn rainbow vomit labeled as Google or whatever you want to customize it to. Speaking of AYA Space, it's the device's app that has an overlay which allows you to change TDP, fan speeds, and even launch games directly from it. There is a downside, which I'll talk about later. For I/O, AYA NEO 2 has 3 USB-C ports, a microSD slot, and a headphone jack. There's also this fingerprint scanner, which, if you're not concerned about your biometrics, is pretty useful. A low-key game changer if you hate getting smudges on the screen like I do. And of course, there are additional face buttons near the bottom of the device which pull up AYA Space, reveal the desktop, and so forth, just like other Windows handhelds. For accessories, you get an 85-watt charger with a detachable cable, some USB-C to USB-A adapters, some international plug adapters, and little plastic tabs if you decide to open the device and swap out an SSD or something, all inside the box. Not bad at all. I didn't opt to buy one of the official cases. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows with the AYA NEO 2. Let's get to the cons. The first is, just like with the AOKZOE A1, its price. It's really pricey. As of this video, you can still get it through Indiegogo for $9.99, but I assume that if you wait for a retailer, it's going to increase in price to what they advertise as $10.99. And that's nearly twice the cost of the top-end Steam Deck model. Now, this was my primary complaint with the AOKZOE A1 as well. These handhelds are just very costly, and we can say whatever we want about Valve being able to subsidize the cost of the Steam Deck, but the conclusion is the same when you are the one that foots the bill. There is a less premium alternative in the AYA NEO GEEK, but I'll save that for the analysis section. Remember when I mentioned AYA Space being able to change TDPs and whatnot earlier? Well, there's a big problem with that app once it's updated. It stays in Chinese regardless of what settings you choose. So that's fine if you read it, but for everyone else, have fun doing some guesswork. Don't blow anything up! What else bothers me about the device is the lackluster battery life. It has a slightly larger 50.25 watt-hour battery, which you might think is 20% larger than the Steam Deck's 40 watt-hour battery on paper, but real-world usage just doesn't break down that way due to various reasons like OS optimization, battery efficiency, and other things like that. Basically, I found the device running out of juice fairly quickly even when doing my benchmarking, giving me battery life just over an hour and 10 minutes or an hour and 30 minutes if I was playing a more demanding game. Another minor gripe is the lack of a kickstand, which I actually found really useful on the A1. There is no official kickstand case or anything, so you're out of luck there if you want one. Speaking of cases, like with the A1, with these companies making these devices, don't expect to have a lot of choices when it comes to accessories or stellar support if you need help troubleshooting or repairing something. But let's stop the hate parade for a second to talk about what really matters: performance. For today's review, a 4th game was added to the suite of benchmarks. All were tested at 800p to compare with the deck, and 1200p for comparison with the AYA NEO 2 and the AOKZOE A1. Do also note that each benchmark was run at least 3 times to produce better reliability, and all tests also included use of FSR balanced when available. For Horizon Zero Dawn, we see the Steam Deck is very efficient at 10 watts TDP, whereas the AOKZOE A1 and AYA NEO 2 aren't. This is once again likely due to the 6800U not being optimized for 10 watts TDP. So if you plan to play at this wattage, you'll likely have to do some tinkering with clocks, or auto TDP. At 15 watts though, we start to see again that the AYANEO 2 and A1 show their advantages over the Steam Deck. Why exactly there is a difference between the A1 and the AYANEO 2, I'm not exactly sure, but this was repeatable across benchmarks, as you'll see later. There isn't much to say at the 33 watts and 28 watts level, other than they're very similar in performance. At 1200p, we see pretty much unplayable frame rates at 10 watts, so they're there just for academic purposes only. But at medium and even high settings, for the higher TDPs, we get into playable range above 30 FPS, which is impressive. Moving over to Cyberpunk 2077, we see very similar results to that of Horizon Zero Dawn. The deck again is more efficient and performant at 10 watts TDP, while the A1 and AYANEO 2 pull away above 15 watts TDP. There you can see again that at 28 watts on the A1 and 33 watts on the AYANEO 2, we see very similar results in terms of average frame rate and 1% lows. At 1200p, we get into the playable range when you go above 15 watts. I didn't test 20 watts, but I assume that you can get close to playable 30 to 40 FPS either by changing settings to low or by changing FSR mode to performance. The Steam Deck preset in Cyberpunk 2077 seems to be some low-medium mix. Now moving over to Shadow of the Tomb Raider. I won't spend much time because these results are again very similar to the previous two games, except that in this game I used Intel XeSS rather than FSR as that wasn't available. I'll pause for a moment so that you can see the results at both 800p and 1200p. For the new game added to the bench suite, we have Tom Clancy's The Division 2. This game has been known to be buggy for years, particularly when using DX12. So even though all of these devices would likely benefit from the use of DX12, it was tested here using DX11 as DX12 causes crashes on the Steam Deck. No surprises here except that all of these devices can hit above 60 FPS on 800p low. The deck could probably go above 60 FPS on low, but the display settings won't allow you to go above 60, which is why you see 60 and 59 FPS. So if you're playing this on deck, you can probably put the graphics to medium, high, or some custom mix like that. Going back to the previous game benchmarks, about 28 watts on the A1 and 33 watts on the AYANEO 2 producing very similar results, you can probably come up with some conclusion of your own. But one of two conclusions I came up with was that the A1 is able to hit the same performance at a lower wattage, or that the extra 5 watts of TDP doesn't actually do anything. Since I don't notice any thermal throttling on the AYANEO 2, I'm more inclined to believe that it's the second one. Remember that the Ryzen 7 6800U is spec'd for 15 to 28 watts, according to AMD. As for why the A1 has been consistently producing slightly better frame rates, I'm not willing to say that it's because it's a better product. It could actually be due to Silicon Lottery. What are your 6800U devices performing like? How do they compare to these benchmarks? Moving on to dollars per frame analysis, you can see that for sheer performance for the money, the deck is a very strong contender. For both the A1 and the AYANEO 2, you're paying a significant amount of money more per frame. Even if we throw out the 10 watt results, you're still paying a lot more. However, the advantage of the 6800U is still that you get a performance level that simply isn't possible on the Steam Deck. So you'll have to decide for yourself whether things like better screen, fancy thumbsticks, and battery size are worth the extra money for you. Oh, and of course RGB, but that has an unquantifiable value. If you factor in the AYA NEO GEEK, the price does come down much closer to the Steam Deck, and that makes it a direct competitor. But don't forget that the AYA NEO GEEK has an 800p screen, and it doesn't have that glass top. So it's not exactly the same as an AYA NEO 2. Except that performance levels should be the same. So what's the verdict? I really like the form factor of the AYANEO 2. It's slightly smaller than the Steam Deck, and it definitely packs a punch. The battery life improvement, let's call it, isn't much to write home about, but I definitely appreciate the attention to detail on the device as a whole. I think ultimately if you like 7 inches as a display size, it's hard to go wrong, assuming you're okay with the price. One thing to note here though is that I've not personally had any experience with the company outside of purchasing this device, which was not sponsored by the way, and so my interactions with them have been limited. As with all of these companies, they're unlikely to give you the support level that Valve can, so keep that in mind if you're worried about what could possibly go wrong. Now what about if you either want more portability or a bigger screen? For more portability, you could probably take a look at the GPD Win 4, as it's super portable with the 6-inch screen. And on the flip side, you have the AOKZOE A1 and the One X Player 2. Check out my review of the A1 here. Thanks for watching, and see you next time for more games, gadgets, and gear.
GG.